The morning sun rose over Talon 5, just like it had for the past 70 years. The sky glowed purple and orange as the light touched the crystal gardens that stretched across the valley. Halm stood at the window of his study, watching the younger Veshan tend to the glowing formations. These crystals powered their homes, lit their streets, and connected their small world to the stars above. Life on Talon 5 was peaceful. It had always been peaceful. Halm was old even by Veshan standards. His scales had turned from bright green to a soft gray, and his movements were slow and careful. He had lived through the founding of the colony, had seen the first crystal gardens planted, had watched 3 generations of Veshan children grow up under these purple skies. He was the keeper of their history, the guardian of their records, the one who remembered the old ways and the old stories. The Veshan were not warriors. They had no weapons beyond the tools they used for farming. They had no military, no defense grid, no soldiers. Their ancestors had fled war long ago, searching for a quiet place to build a new life. They found it on Talon 5, a world so far from the major trade routes that no one bothered them. For 70 years they lived in peace. That peace ended at noon. The sky tore open with a sound like thunder. Halm dropped the ancient book he was reading and rushed to the window. Above the valley, space itself seemed to split apart. Ships emerged from the tears and reality, huge and dark and terrible. They were nothing like the gentle colony ships that had brought the Veshan here. These were warships, bristling with weapons, moving with clear purpose. The first explosion came seconds later. The northern settlement, home to 2,000 Veshan, simply vanished in a ball of fire. Then the eastern farms. Then the crystal processing center. The ships were firing on civilian targets, destroying homes and fields with cold efficiency. Halm's hands shook as he watched his world burn. Within an hour, smaller ships landed. They disgorged soldiers, if you could call them that. They looked like giant insects covered in black armor, moving in perfect formation. The Kreth Dominion had come to Talon 5, and they had come to take what they wanted. Halm knew about the Kreth from his historical records. They were conquerors, expanding their empire system by system. They took what they wanted and destroyed anything that stood in their way. But Talon 5 had nothing of value. They were farmers and artists, tending their crystal gardens and living simple lives. Why would the Kreth want them? The answer came that evening. Kreth soldiers marched into Halm's village, demanding to see the elder. The village leader, an old female named Sira, stepped forward. She tried to speak, to ask why they had come, to plead for peace. The Kreth commander simply raised his weapon and shot her. She fell without a sound. Through a translator device, the commander spoke. His voice was cold and mechanical. The Kreth had detected iridium deposits beneath Talon 5's surface. Rare iridium, worth a fortune in galactic markets. The Veshan would leave or die. They had one day to decide, but there was nowhere to go. The Veshan had no ships capable of carrying 40,000 people. They had no weapons to fight back. They had no allies to call for help. They were alone, facing an enemy that saw them as nothing more than obstacles to be removed. That night, as fires burned across the planet, the surviving Veshan gathered in small groups. Some wanted to surrender to beg for mercy. Others wanted to fight even knowing it was hopeless. Halm listened to them argue, watched them cry, felt their fear and desperation. These were peaceful people facing the unthinkable. As the arguments continued, Halm quietly returned to his study. In the back room, behind shelves of ancient books, sat a device he had hoped never to use. It was an emergency beacon, installed when the colony was first founded. The original settlers had brought it from their homeworld, a final desperate tool in case disaster struck. Halm stared at the beacon for a long time. It was old technology, using protocols from before faster-than-light travel became common. The chances of anyone receiving the signal were small. The chances of anyone responding were smaller still. The galaxy was a big place, and the Veshan were nobodies, a forgotten colony on a forgotten world. But what else could he do? Sit and wait for death? Watch his people, his culture, his entire world be erased by invaders who saw them as nothing? With trembling hands, Halm activated the beacon. It hummed to life, its ancient circuits warming up slowly. A light began to pulse, sending out a signal into the void. A simple message repeating over and over, "Help us. Please, someone help us." Halm didn't expect an answer. He just needed to do something. Anything rather than accept the end without trying. By the next morning, the Kreth had grown impatient. They gave no more time for decisions. Their soldiers began sweeping through the remaining settlements. killing anyone who resisted and driving the rest toward the Valley of Glass. It was the largest open space on Talon 5, surrounded by the oldest and most beautiful crystal formations. The Kreth were herding them like animals, concentrating them in one place for easier elimination. 10,000 Vaishon made it to the valley. The others were dead or dying in the ruins of their homes. The survivors had nothing but what they could carry. Some of the younger males tried to organize a defense using farming equipment and tools. They built crude barricades from broken crystal and overturned vehicles. Everyone knew it wouldn't be enough. Halm stood with them, an ancient cutting tool in his hands. Around him, children clung to their parents. Elderly Vaishon sat quietly, scales dulled with exhaustion. Artists who had spent their lives creating beauty, now prepared to die defending it. The crystal formations around them glowed softly in the fading light, beautiful and serene, uncaring about the violence that was coming. On the third day, the Kreth assembled their forces at the valley entrance. Halm could see them through the makeshift barricades, thousands of soldiers in black armor, supported by massive war machines that looked like metal insects. Artillery pieces were being positioned, their barrels pointing into the valley. This wasn't going to be a battle. It was going to be an execution. That night, Halm gathered the youngest Vaishon around him. He told them stories of their ancestors, of the long journey from their homeworld, of the hope that had brought them to this peaceful planet. He tried to give them courage, tried to make them understand that their lives had meaning even if they ended here. No one mentioned the beacon. No one dared to hope. Dawn came cold and clear. The Kreth artillery opened fire at first light. The sound was deafening and the ground shook with each impact. The crystal formations that had stood for thousands of years shattered like glass. The crude barricades vaporized under the bombardment. Vaishon with energy weapons tried to return fire, but their shots bounced harmlessly off the Kreth armor. Then the soldiers advanced. Black-armored Kreth marched forward in perfect lines, their weapons cutting down anyone who stood against them. The Vaishon defense collapsed within minutes. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. This was the end. Halm held his cutting tool and waited for death. Around him, his people fought with desperate courage, knowing it meant nothing. The Kreth kept coming, unstoppable, overwhelming, inevitable. In his heart, Halm said goodbye to his world, to his people, to everything he had loved. He never expected anyone to answer his call. He had sent that signal into the void, believing it would die unheard. Just like his people. He was wrong. 6 days before the Kreth artillery began pounding the Valley of Glass, Commander Deho sat in his captain's chair aboard the patrol carrier Indomitable. His shift was almost over and it had been quiet. That was normal for this sector of space. Nothing much happened out here on the edge of known territory. Patrol duty was boring, but it was important. Someone had to watch the borders, even the boring ones. Lieutenant Jiwoo looked up from her communications console. She had been with Deho for 3 years now, and he could read her expressions well. Right now, she looked confused. "Commander, I'm picking up something strange," she said. "It's a distress signal, but it's using really old protocols. Like centuries old." Deho stood and walked to her station. On the screen, he could see the signal data. Jiwoo was right. These were protocols from the early colony days, before humanity had developed modern, faster-than-light communications. Someone was calling for help using ancient technology. "Where's it coming from?" Deho asked. Jiwoo ran the calculations. "A planet called Talon 5. It's 47 light-years from our current position. Not in Alliance space, Commander. Not in anyone's space, really. It's way out on the frontier." Deho stared at the data. 47 light-years. That would take days to reach, even with military-grade jump drives. And Talon 5 wasn't a human world. The signal was genuine, but it wasn't from his people. Commander Yuna walked over to join them. She was Deho's second-in-command, and had been his friend for even longer. They had served together for 15 years, through good times and bad. She looked at the signal, then at Deho, and he could see the question in her eyes. "It's not our jurisdiction," Yuna said quietly. "We're on patrol duty. We have our assigned sector, and whoever sent that signal isn't human." She was right, of course. By regulations, they should log the signal and report it to Alliance Command. Let the diplomats handle it. Let someone else decide if it was worth responding to. That was the proper procedure. But Deho had spent 20 years in the military, and he had learned that sometimes proper procedure led to good people dying while everyone followed the rules. "Jiwoo, can you get more information about Talon 5? He asked. The lieutenant worked her console. Not much in the databases. It's listed as a minor agricultural colony, population about 40,000. Species is listed as Vishan. That's all I've got. 40,000 people, farmers probably. Peaceful colonists who had settled on a quiet world and wanted nothing more than to live their lives. And now they were calling for help using technology so old it barely worked. Deho walked to the observation window. Space stretched out before him, cold and vast and empty. Somewhere out there, 40,000 people were in trouble. They had sent out a call for help, probably not even knowing if anyone would hear it. He thought about his own daughter, Hana. She was 8 years old now, living with her mother on Nova Sol. Her favorite bedtime story was about the old colony ships, about how humanity had spread to the stars. In that story, when colonists needed help, other humans came. It was a simple story, the kind you told children to help them sleep. But Deho had always believed it should be more than just a story. "Commander," Yuna said behind him, "if we respond to this, we'll be leaving our patrol sector. Command will want to know why." "I know," Deho said. "We could lose our commissions. This could end our careers." "I know that too." Yuna stood next to him at the window. "So what are we going to do?" Deho turned to face his bridge crew. They were all watching him, waiting for his decision. Good people, every one of them. They had families, careers, futures. He was about to ask them to risk all of that for strangers on a world they had never heard of. "Jiwoo, send out a message on all military frequencies," Deho said. "Any ship within range that wants to help respond to a distress call, meet us at these coordinates. Make it clear that this is voluntary and that anyone who comes might face consequences." Yuna smiled slightly. "You're really doing this?" "Someone sent out a call for help," Deho said. "I'm not going to ignore it." "I can't." The message went out. Deho didn't expect much response. Most commanders would see the risks and stay away. Following orders was safer than risking everything for strangers. He understood that. He wouldn't blame anyone for choosing the safe path. But within 3 hours, responses started coming in. The destroyer Relentless, commanded by Captain Minho. Deho knew Minho. They had fought together at the Battle of Proxima, where they held off an entire pirate fleet with just a handful of ships. Minho's message was simple: "We're in." Then came the medical frigate Mercy. Dr. Soman commanded that ship, running humanitarian missions across Alliance space. Her message said, "Someone needs help." That's enough reason for me. The assault carrier Thunder, the supply ship Morning Star, the scout frigate Quicksilver. One by one, ships responded. 7 vessels in total. Captains who heard the call and decided that some things were more important than careers and regulations. As the small fleet assembled, Deho received another message. This one was from Alliance Command. It was an order: "Stand down, return to patrol, do not respond to unauthorized signals." Someone at headquarters had noticed what he was doing and wanted it stopped. Deho read the first line of the order, then deleted it without reading the rest. Yuna raised an eyebrow. "Didn't read the whole thing?" she asked. "Nope," Deho said. "Can't disobey orders I didn't fully read." She laughed, though it was a nervous sound. They both knew this was serious. They were about to commit career suicide, possibly face military court. But they were also about to save lives if they weren't too late. "All ships prepare for jump to Talon 5, Deho ordered. ETA 4 days. Stay sharp, people. We don't know what we're jumping into." The jump drives powered up. In the fighter bay, pilot Taeyang and his squadron prepared their ships. In the marine deck, Sergeant Heejin drilled her troops on rapid deployment. Everyone aboard knew they were racing towards something bad, maybe arriving too late to help. Every 8 hours during the journey, long-range probes sent back updated scans of Talon 5. Each report was worse than the last. Multiple warships in orbit, plasma bombardment detected, population readings dropping. On the 3rd day of the journey, Taeyang came to the bridge. He was young for a squadron leader, only 26, but he was the best pilot Deho had ever seen. "Commander, I've been running simulations," Taeyang said. "If we come out of jump at the standard distance, it'll take us 20 minutes to reach the planet. Based on these scans, they might not have 20 minutes. Deho nodded. He had been thinking the same thing. "What are you suggesting?" "Close jump. Right into low orbit. It's dangerous, but it means we can engage immediately." Yuna sucked in a breath. Close jumps were risky. The calculations had to be perfect or they would come out inside the planet's atmosphere. or worse, inside the planet itself. But Deho had already decided. They had come this far. They had risked everything to answer a stranger's call. There was no point in arriving safely if they arrived too late. Send the word to all ships, Deho ordered. We're doing a combat jump directly into low orbit. Tell them to strap in tight and pray their navigation systems are accurate. 4 days after receiving the signal, 7 human ships prepared to jump into a war zone to save people they had never met. Deho stood on his bridge, calm and ready. He had made his choice. Now he would see it through, whatever the cost. The jump drives reached full power. Reality bent around the ships, and somewhere far away, an old Veshan scholar named Hom watched the Kreth advance, believing his world's final moments had come. He was about to be proven wrong. The sun was rising over the Valley of Glass when everything changed. Hom stood at the barricade, an old cutting tool gripped in his trembling hands. Around him, the last Veshan defenders prepared for death. They had fought through the night, but it wasn't enough. It could never be enough. The Kreth soldiers kept coming, their black armor unstoppable, their weapons cutting through everything the Veshan threw at them. At 8:47 in the morning, the sky exploded. That was the only way Hom could describe it later. One moment, there was nothing but the purple sky and distant stars. The next moment, space itself tore open with a sound like thunder and lightning combined. Bright light flooded the valley, so intense that everyone stopped fighting and looked up. 7 massive tears appeared in reality. They weren't the smooth, quiet jumps that Hom had read about in his history books. These were violent, deliberate, impossible. Ships emerged from the tears, dropping into low orbit so close that Hom could see their hulls clearly. They were huge, covered in armor and weapons, moving with purpose and power. The Kreth soldiers faltered. Their perfect formation broke as they looked up at the unexpected arrivals. In orbit above, the Kreth cruisers began turning their weapons toward the new ships. But they were too slow. Aboard the Indomitable, Commander Deho gripped his command console as the ship finished its emergency jump. They had made it. The close jump had worked. They were in low orbit, right where they needed to be. On the view screen, he could see Talon 5 below, beautiful and burning. Tactical report, Deho ordered. Lieutenant Jiwoo's fingers flew over her console. 3 Kreth cruisers in orbit. Multiple landing ships on the surface. Ground forces concentrated at a valley on the northern continent. I'm reading. Commander, I'm reading about 8,000 life signs in that valley, surrounded by at least 20,000 hostiles. The hostiles are actively engaging. They were in the middle of a massacre. Deho felt cold fury settle over him. They had traveled for 4 days, risked everything to get here, and they had almost been too late. Almost, but not quite. All ships, combat formation, Deho said, his voice calm and cold. Relentless, engage the Kreth cruisers. Mercy, take up orbital position for evacuation operations. Thunder, deploy your Marines to the valley perimeter. He paused, then switched to the fighter squadron channel. Taeyang, you're cleared hot. Go save some lives. In the fighter bay, Taeyang and his squadron were already strapped into their ships. He had been waiting for this moment since they first received the distress signal. His squadron was the best humanity had. 20 fighters, 20 of the finest pilots in Alliance space. They had trained together for years, flying in perfect coordination. All wings, follow me in, Taeyang said. We're going hot into atmosphere. Watch your vectors and mind the friendly positions. Let's show these bugs what humanity thinks of bullies. The fighters launched, diving toward the planet at speeds that would kill an unprotected human. But these pilots were augmented, enhanced, trained to handle forces that would turn normal people into paste. They screamed through the upper atmosphere, their sleek delta wing shapes cutting through the air like knives. Halm heard them before he saw them. A sound like rolling thunder, building and building until it drowned out everything else. Then they appeared, dropping from the clouds so fast they seemed to materialize out of nothing. 20 human fighters, pulling up at the last second in a maneuver that should have been impossible. And then they opened fire. The railguns mounted on the fighters fired solid rounds at a significant fraction of light speed. When those rounds hit Kreth armor, the armor simply ceased to exist. Soldiers vanished in clouds of superheated metal. War machines exploded like toys. The artillery pieces that had been pounding the valley turned into balls of fire. Missiles streaked from the fighters' wings, each one finding its target with perfect accuracy. Kreth landing ships trying to lift off were blown out of the sky. Command vehicles exploded. In seconds, the organized Kreth assault turned into chaos. Taeyang pulled his fighter through a turn that generated forces strong enough to crush stone. His targeting computer painted hostile after hostile in red. So many targets. He selected them in groups, fired, watched them disappear, moved to the next group. His squadron followed his lead, covering every angle, making sure no Kreth soldier escaped. In orbit, the destroyer Relentless engaged the Kreth cruisers. Captain Minho stood on his bridge watching the tactical display. The Kreth had 3 ships to his 1. They outmassed him by a factor of 6. By any reasonable calculation, he should lose this fight. But human point defense was legendary. Every missile the Kreth fired was intercepted. Every plasma bolt was tracked and evaded. The Relentless moved like a dancer, weaving between attacks that should have destroyed her. Then Minho returned fire. The Relentless's main railgun fired rounds that hit with the force of tactical nuclear weapons. The first Kreth cruiser's shields collapsed under the barrage. The second salvo punched through its hull. The third turned it into an expanding cloud of debris. The other 2 Kreth cruisers tried to run. They were too slow. The Indomitable and Thunder added their firepower to the Relentless. The space battle lasted exactly 4 minutes. When it was over, the Kreth fleet was gone. On the ground, Sergeant Heejin's Marines hit the valley perimeter and dropped pods. The pods slammed into the ground like meteors, and armored figures emerged from each one. The Marines stood over 2 meters tall in their powered armor, carrying weapons that looked too big for any normal human to lift. They established a defensive line with practiced efficiency. Heejin checked her tactical display, saw the Veshan position, saw the Kreth forces. She opened a channel on all frequencies and broadcast in Galactic Standard. Indigenous population, this is Human Alliance Marines. Hold your position. We've got this. The Kreth tried to regroup, tried to press their numerical advantage. But human Marines in powered armor were like nothing they had ever faced. Kreth plasma fire bounced off their shields. Human weapons cut through Kreth positions like they were made of paper. And behind the Marine line, Taeyang's fighters continued their deadly work, striking any Kreth unit that tried to maneuver. The Kreth began to retreat. Then the retreat became a rout. Thousands of soldiers who had been advancing confidently minutes ago now ran for their lives. Some dropped their weapons and surrendered. Others kept running. The Marines accepted the surrenders and secured the prisoners. This surprised the Kreth. The Dominion didn't take prisoners. Halm stood frozen, watching it all happen. Crystal dust fell around him like snow from the shattered formations. The Kreth, who had seemed unstoppable, were running away. And chasing them were beings Halm had never seen before. Humans. They had come from nowhere, appeared like something from a legend, and turned certain death into impossible victory. A young Veshan next to him spoke, her voice shaking. Who are they? Halm watched a human fighter bank impossibly hard and circle back for another pass. He watched the Marines in their massive armor standing between the Veshan and any remaining threat. He watched ships in orbit that had destroyed a Kreth fleet in minutes. I don't know, Halm said, but tears ran down his scaled face. I sent out a call for help. I never thought anyone would answer. An hour later, a shuttle descended from orbit. It landed in the valley and a human emerged. He was shorter than a Veshan, but he carried himself with quiet authority. He wore a military uniform, and he walked with purpose toward where the Veshan survivors had gathered. Behind him came another human carrying some kind of device. When the first human spoke, the device translated his words into Galactic Standard. I'm Commander Deho of the Human Alliance, he said. We received your distress call. I'm sorry we didn't arrive sooner. Halm stepped forward. He looked at this human commander, at the ships in orbit, at the Marines standing guard. His voice broke when he spoke. We believed no one would come, Halm said. We are not warriors. We have nothing to offer you in return. Commander Deho met his gaze steadily. You don't need to be warriors, and you don't need to offer us anything. You called for help. That's enough. He gestured to the valley, to the survivors, to the shattered but standing Veshan community. Our species learned after a dark history to answer calls like yours. Not for profit, not for territory, but because it's right. Halm stared at him. In all his years and all his study of history and galactic politics, he had never heard of anything like this. Species that helped strangers for no gain. Warriors who protected the weak simply because it was right. Around them, human medical teams were already moving among the wounded, working alongside Veshan healers. Marines helped clear rubble. Fighters continued their patrol overhead. These humans weren't conquerors. They were protectors. They had come to help, and they were still helping. For the first time in days, Halm allowed himself to hope. His people would survive. They had called into darkness, and light had answered. The battle was over in less than an hour. The Kreth forces, so confident just minutes before, were either dead, captured, or running for their lives. The human ships established a defensive grid around Talon 5, making sure no more Kreth could arrive. On the ground, human marines and medical teams worked alongside the Vaesian survivors, treating the wounded and securing the area. Halm walked through the valley with Commander Daeho and Lieutenant Jiwoo. The human commander wanted to see the damage, to understand what had happened here. Everywhere they looked, there were signs of the desperate fight. Broken barricades, shattered crystal formations, scorch marks from Kreth weapons, and bodies. So many bodies. 30,000. Halm said quietly. 30,000 of my people died before you arrived. We had 40,000 3 days ago. Now we have 10,000 left. Daeho's jaw tightened. I'm sorry. We came as fast as we could. You came at all, Halm said, looking at the human commander. That is more than we dared hope for. They walked in silence for a while. Halm noticed how the humans moved among his people. There was no arrogance in them, no sense that they expected gratitude or payment. They just worked, helping where they could, treating Vaesian wounded with the same care they would give their own. Dr. Soman's medical teams had set up a field hospital in one of the intact buildings. Halm watched as human doctors worked alongside Vaesian healers, sharing equipment and knowledge. One young human medic was carefully bandaging a Vaesian child's arm, speaking softly even though the child couldn't understand the words. The tone was enough. The child stopped crying. Why? Halm finally asked. Commander Daeho, I must know. Why did you come? Your Lieutenant Jiwoo told me you traveled for 4 days to reach us. You disobeyed orders. You risked your ships and your lives for people you never met. Why? Daeho stopped walking. He looked out over the valley, at the destruction and the survivors, at his people helping strangers. When he spoke, his voice was soft. A long time ago, my species almost destroyed itself, he said. We fought wars over everything: religion, resources, territory, ideology. We came very close to making ourselves extinct. When we finally learned to work together, when we finally made it to the stars, we made a promise. We would be different. We would be better. He turned to face Halm. You sent out a call for help. That means something. It means everything. Because someday it might be us calling for help. And we hope that someone will answer. Halm felt something break inside him. Not in a bad way. It was like a wall he hadn't known he was carrying suddenly crumbled. He sat down on a piece of broken crystal and wept. Not from grief this time, but from hope. From the impossible realization that there were people in the galaxy who would travel across the stars to help strangers. Daeho sat next to him and said nothing. Sometimes silence was the best thing you could offer someone. Over the next several days, the humans worked to stabilize Talon 5. They set up a temporary orbital defense platform. They helped repair buildings. They shared their supplies. Commander, Borum's Marines from the Thunder, taught young Vaesian basic defense tactics, not to make them soldiers, but to help them protect themselves if danger came again. Pilot Taeyang and his squadron continued flying patrols, making sure the Kreth didn't return. The young Vaesian watched the fighters with awe, these sleek ships dancing through the sky like they were alive. Some of the children started drawing pictures of the fighters, turning them into heroes from a story. But not everything was peaceful. On the 7th day after the battle, a message arrived from Alliance Command. Daeho read it in his ready room, with Yuna standing beside him. The message was clear. He and the other ship commanders were to return to Alliance space immediately to face military court charges: abandoning patrol, unauthorized engagement, violation of treaty protocols. Well, Yuna said after Daeho finished reading. We knew this was coming. Yeah, Daeho said. He looked at the message again. Court-martial. End of career. maybe prison time, depending on how angry the admirals were. He thought about everything he had worked for, everything he would lose. Then he thought about Hom, about the Veshan children who were alive because he had made a choice, about 30,000 dead and 10,000 saved. "I'd do it again," he said. "Even knowing the cost, I'd do it again." Yuna smiled. "So would I." Word of what had happened at Talon 5 was already spreading through Alliance space. Lieutenant Jiwoo had sent combat footage to several news networks before anyone could stop her. Now billions of humans were watching the battle, watching the Veshan's desperate stand, watching their military drop from the sky to save strangers. The response was overwhelming. Protests erupted on every major human world, demanding that the charges be dropped. Veterans organized rallies supporting Daeho and the other commanders. People who had never been interested in politics suddenly cared deeply about what happened to these military officers who had risked everything to save lives. Daeho's daughter Hana became an unexpected symbol. Someone had posted a picture of her with her father, taken during his last leave. The caption read, "He answered the call. We all should." The image went viral, shared millions of times. Meanwhile, Hom prepared to travel to Alliance space. He had never left Talon 5 before, but he knew what he had to do. A delegation of Veshan survivors would go with him, to speak on behalf of the humans who had saved them. Before they left, Hom found Daeho standing in the Valley of Glass. The commander was looking at the memorial the Veshan had begun building. It was a simple structure made from the pieces of shattered crystal, reformed into something new. "It's beautiful," Daeho said. "It's for your people," Hom said. "To remember what you did here." Daeho shook his head. "We just did what was right. That's why it matters," Hom said. "In all my studies of history of the galaxy and its countless species, I never found anything like this. Species conquer, species trade, species form alliances based on mutual benefit. But I never read about species that help strangers simply because it's right." He placed a hand on Daeho's shoulder. "I will tell your Senate what happened here. I will tell them about the choice you made. And I will tell them that my people are alive because one human commander decided that a stranger's call for help was worth answering." 2 weeks later, the military court convened. The room was packed with observers, journalists, and protesters. Daeho and the other commanders stood before the judges, prepared to face the consequences of their actions. The prosecution presented its case. The violations were clear: abandoning assigned patrol, unauthorized military engagement, ignoring direct orders. By the letter of military law, the commanders were guilty. Then the defense called its witnesses. Hom testified, speaking with quiet dignity about what had happened on Talon 5. Dr. Soman presented casualty figures and medical reports. Sergeant Heejin described finding Veshan children hiding in ruins, alive because humans had arrived just in time. The head judge was Admiral Kyung-soo, a veteran who had served with Daeho during the Proxima conflict. He listened to everything, his expression unreadable. When it was time for the verdict, the entire galaxy seemed to hold its breath. Kyung-soo stood, and the room fell silent. "Commander Daeho violated orders," Kyung-soo said. "This is fact. He risked his ship and crew without authorization. This is also fact." He paused, looking at Daeho. "But he upheld the highest principles of the human alliance and our species' commitment to protecting the innocent." Kyung-soo's voice grew stronger. "The law is important. It exists to maintain order and discipline, but it exists to serve justice, not to replace it. Commander Daeho and the officers under review made a choice. They chose to save lives over following regulations. They chose to answer a call for help over protecting their careers." He looked around the room. 10,000 people are alive today because of that choice. That has to mean something. The court issues a formal reprimand as required by regulation. But we also recommend these officers for commendation for actions above and beyond the call of duty. This court is adjourned. The room erupted in cheers. Daeho stood quietly, feeling like the weight of the world had lifted from his shoulders. He kept his command. More importantly, he had proven that doing the right thing still mattered, even in a galaxy governed by rules and regulations. As he left the courtroom, Halm was waiting for him. The old Veshan scholar smiled, his scales catching the light. "Thank you," Halm said simply. "No," Deho replied. "Thank you for calling. Thank you for believing someone might answer." And in that moment, both of them understood. Something had changed in the galaxy. A message had been sent and everyone had heard it. If you call for help, humanity will answer. No matter the distance, no matter the cost, someone will come. 6 months after the Battle of Talon 5, Commander Deho stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, back on patrol duty. But everything was different now. The sector had changed. The entire galaxy had changed. The court-martial verdict had sparked something unexpected. Within weeks of the trial, the Human Alliance had formalized a new doctrine. They called it the Emergency Response Initiative. Any human military vessel could now respond to legitimate distress calls, regardless of location or political boundaries, at the commander's discretion. It was controversial. Some alien powers saw it as human expansionism disguised as charity, but smaller species, the ones without powerful militaries or rich allies, saw it differently. They saw hope. Lieutenant Jiwoo looked up from her communications console. "Commander, we're receiving another distress signal." Deho walked to her station. This was the third signal they had received this month. Word had spread across the galaxy. Species that had never heard of humans before now knew. If you call, they will answer. "What's the situation?" Deho asked. "Mining colony on Virgil 3. They're reporting pirate activity. Request immediate assistance." Jiwoo pulled up the data. Colony population about 5,000. Non-human species. Not in Alliance space. 6 months ago, Deho would have had to make a choice that could end his career. Now it was standard procedure. Calculate jump coordinates. All hands prepare for emergency response deployment. Commander Yuna came to stand beside him. "You know, every time we get one of these calls, I think about Talon 5, about Halm and his people, about how close we came to being too late." "Me too," Deho said. "That's why we go. Every time. No matter what." On Talon 5, life had slowly returned to normal. The Veshan were rebuilding their settlements, replanting their crystal gardens, healing from the trauma of the invasion. But they were different now. They had learned that the galaxy could be dangerous, but they had also learned that they weren't alone. Halm stood in his rebuilt study, looking at the memorial in the Valley of Glass. The crystal formation glowed with soft light, eternal and beautiful. Inscribed at its base in both Veshan script and human standard were simple words. "We called into darkness, expecting nothing. They fell from the heavens, demanding nothing. May we all answer when others call." Young Veshan came to the memorial every day. Some left flowers, some left drawings, some just stood and remembered. But more importantly, they learned. The human military had left behind a small training team, teaching basic defense to any Veshan who wanted to learn. Not to make them warriors, but to ensure they could protect themselves if danger came again. Pilot Taiyang's fighter squadron had become semi-permanent residents. They flew regular patrols, ensuring no hostile forces approached Talon 5. The Veshan children watched them with awe. These human pilots who danced through the sky like artists. Some of the children talked about becoming pilots themselves someday. Halm had received a message that morning from Commander Deho. The human commander reported that they had responded to 2 more distress calls in the past month. Both times they had arrived in time. Both times they had saved lives. The message ended with a simple line: "Thank you for calling. You reminded us why we do this." Across the galaxy, other species watched and learned. The Kreth Dominion, humiliated by their defeat, had quietly withdrawn from several frontier regions. They added human space to their list of territories to avoid. Other aggressive powers took notice. Humans were not numerous, but they were advanced, skilled, and absolutely committed to protecting the weak. That made them dangerous to anyone who preyed on the helpless. But more importantly, smaller species started reaching out to humanity, not asking for protection but asking for friendship. Trade agreements were signed. Cultural exchanges began. Defensive pacts were proposed. The galaxy was realizing that humanity offered something rare: partnership without domination, help without strings attached. In Alliance space, Deho's daughter Hana was growing up. She was 9 now, And her school had started teaching about the Battle of Talon 5 as an example of human values in action. Her teacher had asked the class what they wanted to be when they grew up. Many students said they wanted to join the military, to be like Commander Deho and the others who had saved the Veshan. Hana had written her father a message about it. She told him about her classes, her friends, normal things. But at the end she wrote, "Dad, my teacher asked what you do. I told her you answer when people call for help. She said that's the most important job anyone can have." Deho read that message every day. It reminded him why he had made the choices he made, why he would continue to make them. The Indomitable dropped out of jump space near Virgil 3. The sensors immediately picked up the situation. 3 pirate ships attacking the mining colony's orbital station. The colonists were fighting back, but they were outgunned. "All hands, combat stations," Deho ordered. Taeyang launch fighters. "Let's show these pirates what happens when they prey on the innocent." The pirates saw the human ship arrive and immediately tried to run. They had heard the stories about Talon 5. They knew what human ships could do, but they weren't fast enough. Taeyang's fighters caught them in minutes. The pirates surrendered without firing a shot. The mining colony sent a message of gratitude. Their administrator was a species Deho had never encountered before, with blue skin and 4 arms. Through the translator, the administrator said, "We heard about Talon 5. We hope the stories were true. Thank you for proving they were." Stories. That's what the Battle of Talon 5 had become. A story that spread across the galaxy, growing and changing as it traveled. Some versions exaggerated the details. Some got facts wrong. But the core message remained true. Humanity answers when you call. Months turned into years. The Emergency Response Initiative became a defining feature of human military doctrine. Human ships responded to dozens of distress calls, saving thousands of lives. Some rescues were dramatic battles. Others were simple evacuations or medical emergencies. It didn't matter. Every call received the same response: immediate action. Other species began to wonder about humanity. Where had they come from? Why were they like this? The answer, when researchers looked into human history, was sobering. Humans had indeed nearly destroyed themselves. Their homeworld still bore scars from wars fought with weapons that could crack continents. They had climbed from the edge of extinction to the stars, and they had learned brutal lessons along the way. Perhaps that was why they answered calls for help. Perhaps having stood at the brink of annihilation made them unwilling to let others fall into that darkness. Perhaps they remembered what it was like to need help and receive none. Whatever the reason, the result was the same. Across the galaxy, species learned a new truth. The universe was vast and often cruel, but somewhere out there humanity watched and listened. If you called for help, they would hear. If they heard, they would come. They would fall from the heavens like heroes from legend. They would stand between the helpless and the void. They would fight when fighting was needed, but they would never conquer. They would help rebuild, then leave when the job was done. They asked for nothing in return except the hope that someday, if humanity needed help, someone would answer their call. On Talon 5, Halm often thought about that day when the Kreth had seemed unstoppable. He thought about activating that ancient beacon, not expecting an answer. He thought about the moment the sky tore open and human ships appeared like something from a dream. Sometimes, in the evening, he would walk to the memorial in the Valley of Glass. Young Veshan would find him there, and they would ask him to tell the story. He would tell them about the darkest days, about the invasion, about the desperate fight, and then he would tell them about the humans who came when no one else would. The children would listen with wide eyes, and then they would ask the same question every time. Will they come again if we need them? Ham would smile and point to the sky, where Taeyang's fighters flew their endless patrols. They never left, and even if they had, yes, if we called, they would come. That's what humanity does, they answer. Aboard the Indomitable, Commander Deho received yet another message from his daughter. She told him she had decided what she wanted to be when she grew up. She wanted to join the military like him. She wanted to help people. She wanted to answer when someone called. Deho read the message and felt his heart swell with pride and worry. He knew the dangers of this life. He knew the costs. But he also knew the meaning it gave, the lives it saved, the hope it created. He wrote back to his daughter, "If that's what you want, I'll support you. But remember, it's not about the battles or the glory. It's about the moment when someone calls for help and you choose to answer. That choice made over and over again is what defines us, not as soldiers, but as people who care. Lieutenant Jiwoo interrupted his thoughts. Commander, incoming transmission. Priority channel. Another distress call. Another species in trouble. Another chance to prove that the stories were true. That humanity meant what it said. That help would always come to those who called. Daeho stood, ready to give the order to jump. This was his purpose. This was humanity's promise to the galaxy. They would answer. They would always answer. Because somewhere out there, on a small agricultural world called Talon 5,